Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, we just got, 3 hours of Ohio State football interviews, give or take. A whole bunch of Ohio State talk. I guess it was more like 2 hours, but still a lot of Ohio State football talk. Feels like we went from the Peach Bowl, where lots of Ohio State football talk, to a month of nothing, and then boom, it's National Signing Day. Nothing is happening with Ohio State and National Signing Day, but man, did we get to talk a lot about football this morning.
We did now, Tom. Now we are the ones drinking through the fire hose with all of the information that, it's just this huge download of talking to every coach for like 20 to 30 minutes, but they're all kind of going on. There's 4 or 5 coaches going on at a time on the indoor. So you're running from place to place, talking and asking questions, hearing snippets of stuff. The day started with Ryan Day for an hour, and then get done with him. And then it's the rest of the coaches for like the next hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. And tons of stuff that came out. So we thought, let's just spill it all, just get it all out there that we heard, that we learned. And then maybe regroup at some point, as Ryan Day says, bring our heads back above water. And after we've listened and read all of the transcripts and gotten all of the information, but just as an initial what we learned today, I think there's quite a bit. And it starts out with some guys who are not going to be taking part in spring practice. And there's some pretty big names here, Tom, and make sure I've got all of these, because he said them all quickly in a row, and I tried to write them all down. So Julian Fleming, Emeka Egbuka, Tommy Eichenberg, Evan Pryor, Mitchell Melton, Travion Henderson, Court Williams, and Jacob James. Did I get them all?
Those are the 8 that I had, yes. Not in the same order somehow. You did not end up with them in the same order that I did, which is interesting. But yes, those are the same names that I had. And, I think I posted something on our board about the list of people, and people were kind of wondering, like, what? How are some of these guys, they were playing, they were essentially full go in the Peach Bowl. What has happened that these guys are now out? And I think there's a lot of just sort of, how they always say no one is 100% at the end of a football season. Well, I think a lot of these guys were not 100% at the end of the football season. And you just ended up, you've got some cleanup surgeries and some stuff that's sort of nagging that you can sort of play through, but then you want to get it fixed during the off season. And they're getting a lot of that stuff fixed now. And then, some of this is also just a lot of these guys, if this was the season, I'm sure could probably be going and ready to go by the time the spring rolls around. But there's no reason to rush back veteran players who are, that you want them healthy. They've got, they're in the, what was the Urban Meyer, the how many rep club?
2,000
rep club. Yeah. That you potentially have guys in the 2,000 rep club where, okay, this is a chance to let some of the younger guys play and get some experience and start to show what they can do. So, I don't think this is any cause for concern for Ohio State. It just feels like, these are a bunch of guys who were not 100% at the end of the season, and then they have some have had some procedures to kind of get some of that stuff cleaned up.
Yeah, all pretty normal. None of it is going to keep any of those guys out from the fall, and so you get it taken care of now, and they'll be ready. And we're going to go through position by position of what we learned. So we'll, I think, get into each of these and their impact of not being in spring ball as we get to their respective positions. But first, Tom, before we do that, Ryan Day was asked about giving up play calling. I feel more confident now that he is going to give up play calling than I did beforehand, because he talked about how they're going to let Brian Hartline do quite a bit of it this spring and see how it goes. Brian Hartline said he's completely comfortable with it, and because he has a good support cast around him. But do you feel more confident that he's going to give up the play calling, or do you think it's just going to go back to revert to what it was?
I think it's going to. I feel almost 100% sure that Brian Hartline is going to be calling plays at least for a while during the season, and that might be starting from day one. But the way Ryan Day framed it was, it's not necessarily as much of an issue at the beginning of the season. It's once you start getting into the middle and end portions of the season when there's so much other stuff going on, and you want to be able to focus on, the sort of more CEO level stuff. team, team building and attitude and, focus and all that kind of stuff. You want to be able to focus on that stuff later in the season, which is not necessarily as much of a concern when you're, in the first couple weeks of the season. Once you get kind of into the point of the season where it sort of turns into a grind, that's where Ryan Day wants to be able to focus on some other stuff. So it feels like, if you have the opportunity to have Brian Hartline start calling plays against, I can't even remember who the bad teams they're playing this year are. Sorry. The games where the talent is not equated. I think Western Kentucky's on the schedule this year. Teams like that. Yeah. Go ahead. It's Western Kentucky and Youngstown State, right?
Yeah, I was going to suggest Ryan Day is probably going to do, in your theory, he's going to do the J.J. McCarthy, Cade McNamara thing where Ryan Day will be like, I'll tell you what, let's just start it out with me. I'll go with the first 3 games, Indiana, Youngstown, Western Kentucky. And then, Brian, I'll turn it over to you for Notre Dame. We'll see how things go. We'll see how happy people are after you call your first game. And if you do a bang-up job, you'll keep doing it. If you can do as good as I did, then you can have the job. But if you don't, then it might be time to come back to me, in which case then it's like Maryland and Purdue. And then Ryan Day be like, okay, I'll give you one more chance. Penn State's coming to town this week. I'm going to let you call the plays. And then it's just going to continue to be this roller coaster of you're letting us down, Brian. I better just keep the plays.
Yeah, I have a strong suspicion that's not exactly how it's going to play out. That's just me, theory. And that it was an interpretation of what I said, I suppose. Yes, it does. It feels like this is Brian Hartline's going to be given every opportunity to be the one who calls the plays this year, and you get the sense that Ryan Day probably wants to do this, because if Ryan Day didn't want to do this, Ryan Day's the head coach, so Ryan Day doesn't have to turn this over. I think Ryan Day recognizes that, hey, this may be something that when you get into the meat of the regular season, like, hey, this may be something that towards the end of the year you want to get some of that stuff off your plate. What honestly might be more interesting to me is when you get back into the December period, if they're heading into the college football playoff again, does he sort of take a bigger role again when you have a little bit more time to take a breath and, have a little bit more, deep dive kind of time when it's not just a week to week grind? Does it go back to him maybe being a little more involved if they're in the CFP semifinals this year? That might be a little interesting to watch and see if there's any kind of change there. But yeah, it does feel like he is, he kind of floated to Kirk Herbstreit about a month ago. And now it seems like, okay, this is maybe, he is very seriously looking at it and sounds like he's probably going to end up doing it.
If he takes over, if he gives Brian Hartline play calling duties and they do really, really well, and then he takes it back over in December for like the playoffs, that's like when Greg Popovich took over the Spurs, because now we've got David Robinson and Tim Duncan. I'm going to go from GM to coach because, I know how best to use these guys. And then you bask in the glory of that. I think that's dirty pool, Tom. I don't like either of your theories. In fact,
I'm not saying he's going to, completely take over the play calling. I'm saying he may get more involved in the game planning process. You're not going to completely change horses midstream there, I don't think, in terms of who's actually calling the plays, but that feels like an opportunity when you have a little more time and a little bit more room to breathe between, it's not just 6 days away, 7 days away from the next game. You maybe have a little more of an opportunity to get involved in the process at that point.
I do wonder how easy it is to switch play callers when things are going well, because we know they switch at times when things are going poorly. I wonder how seamless it is to do it when it's going well, if they choose to do it that way. But let's get into the position stuff. Start with quarterbacks because that's where everything starts. Ohio State obviously has a quarterback battle, going to be a legit quarterback battle starting from level 1 for both guys. They did say that he would like to know who the starter is by the end of spring camp. And I know we've continued to say that there's no way he's going to name a starter before 2 weeks before the first game, just like he did with CJ Stroud, just like he did with Justin Fields. Even when everybody knows the starter, he still holds off. This time, when you have a completely open competition and you don't necessarily know who the starter is, maybe the sooner you find out who that guy is, they said they'd like to know that. It would help the program to know who their leader is, all of that stuff the coaches always talk about. And I believe that, because then I asked him if there's a danger of not knowing who that guy is at the end of spring camp, which is also what happened in the 2017 season with Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow. If you leave spring without an answer, then some of the decisions may be made for you. And that's just a tough situation.
It is a tough situation. And you have guys who are, not quite in exactly the same situation that Joe Burrow was in, but you have a Kyle McCord coming into his third year, and you may have either Kyle McCord or Devin Brown saying, "Look, if I'm not starting this year, I don't want to wait another year or whatever," and you want to kind of have a neat, clean decision coming out of spring ball. I still kind of don't think they're going to. That just doesn't. That feels like that would be a very kind of a big surprise for them to come out of spring with, yes, this is absolutely our starting quarterback for this fall. No questions asked, signed, sealed, delivered. It is done. Because if that does happen, that feels like number one, you're inviting someone to transfer. And number two, it just feels like this is not Justin Fields versus Gunnar Hoke. This is two guys who were both 5-star quarterbacks coming in who have, one has a little bit more experience. They have slightly different skill sets, as Ryan Day said a couple times. But, these are both very, very talented quarterbacks who are going to be, potentially both NFL quarterbacks at some point. So it feels like that's going to be, I don't think that's going to be such a neat, easy, clean decision at the end of spring. They may be forced into making that decision or kind of letting people know, hey, here's where things stand right now. And, you guys are exactly even is not going to be viewed as an acceptable answer. But I would be pretty surprised if one of those guys was so clearly head and shoulders above the other one coming out of spring that it like absolutely 100% stone cold lock. This is going to be the starting quarterback this fall. Maybe that happens. That does not seem like the most likely outcome here.
And it feels like if that did happen, it would almost be because somebody's playing so poorly. And obviously that's not a great sign either. And just both of these guys, neither one of them have played enough to be where they're so far superior to the other. Obviously one's going to be better than the other and is going to win a job. But I think feels like they're too close to have such distance in just 15 spring practices. And, if it happens, it happens. But, I'm with you. I don't expect it to happen, but also that doesn't mean that, neither one, both can be leaders. Ryan Day said, you don't need to be the starting quarterback to be a leader at quarterback. And I would expect both of those guys to continue to lead as if they will be the starting quarterback. And I'm sure they're doing it right now as well. And this is during, off-season mat drills, all this stuff when you have different groups and you can create leaders and name leaders. Or guys are vying to be leaders. I would expect both of the quarterbacks to be heavily involved there. Running backs, Tom, no Travion Henderson, no Evan Pryor in the spring, as we mentioned. So that leaves plenty of room for Dallin Hayden, plenty of room for Mayan Williams that probably don't need to give too many reps to. Chip Trayanum is staying at running back. So it's basically going to be those guys and some young guys or some walk-ons as well. I did find it interesting. Tony Alford was asked about Evan Pryor and the plans that they have for him. And somebody mentioned, could you use him like Xavier Johnson? He's like, yeah, it's kind of, some of the vision that they have for him. And to me, I think that's yes. Using anybody the way you used Xavier Johnson, including Xavier Johnson, I think that is a bonus and is a plus because it's not normal. And it's not gadgety either. It's effective. And if you've got more guys that can do that, more power to you. But it won't be in the spring. But they're not going to have too many guys that they can't. Like everybody's going to the guys that they have. I think you're going to be able to spread it out and having Mayan because we weren't sure exactly how. Was there anything that Mayan would need cleaned up? So we weren't exactly sure he would be participating. But having 3 scholarship guys going, I don't know if you need more than that during the spring, honestly.
You don't need more than that in the spring. And I mean, with the guys who they have, how many reps does Mayan Williams really need in the spring? I mean, I'm sure, I would guess you're going to see a lot of Dallin Hayden this spring, because Mayan Williams is enough of a veteran that you probably don't need to work him super, super hard. Chip train him. We'll see how, where he ends up fitting in that depth chart. One thing that was interesting was they are thinking about using Evan Pryor in a role similar to what they use Xavier Johnson in. So is Xavier Johnson going to be in the running backs room? No. Tony Alford said he's still working with the wide receivers. So they're going to have, potentially you could use those guys in similar roles, but Evan Pryor's not going to be out there in the spring, and Xavier Johnson's not going to be in the running back room. So it'll be interesting to see how all those pieces fit together. But, to your point there, that was such an effective weapon for Ohio State. And it was just a little bit of a change up. It was just a little bit of a twist or a difference off of what they had been running and doing before. And you've got some unique skill sets there. And if you can take advantage of those and just keep your opponent off balance a little bit and give that defense, one more kind of different look to have to prepare for and worry about, and potentially set yourself up with if you get Xavier Johnson on a middle linebacker, that's probably a winning matchup for Ohio State. And you can maybe scheme yourself into situations like that. So yeah, if they can get Evan Pryor into that kind of situation once he's back out there and healthy, you can get Xavier Johnson, those kind of situations. Absolutely, it's just one more weapon that they can potentially deploy this fall.
Tony Alford also said Travion Henderson's pretty bothered by the way he played this year, not being healthy, not being able to do everything that he wanted, and the assumption is that that's going to drive him for next year for his junior season. So look for that. It just again won't happen during the spring. Moving to receivers time, this is something I said to you before we started. Now that Brian Hartline is the offensive coordinator, and he talked for about 22 minutes or so, I think there's only like one question about the wide receivers. And I didn't get a chance to talk to him at all, so I probably also would have asked about being OC now, but we're not going to get as much information from him anymore on wide receivers, it feels like. And also thinking back to talking with Jim Knowles, I don't know how many people asked him about linebacker, and he's a linebackers coach. So that's neither here nor there, Tom, just a complaint about myself and my fellow cohorts in the business. Let's not forget, these guys are position coaches first, okay? Sure, this is the first time you get to talk to Brian Hartline about being offensive coordinator, but we need to find out about these wide receivers.
We do, and I think we're going to find out a lot about them in the spring, because the guys you already know about, the Emeka Egbukas and Julian Flemings, those guys are out. So you're not going to have them taking reps during the spring. We have seen veteran guys, the third year Garrett Wilson, the fourth year Chris Olave. Those guys did not take a ton of reps in the spring. So I feel like Marvin Harrison's probably going to be in that group as well, where you're not going to see, you'll see Marvin Harrison with 3 catches for 30 yards in the spring game, and then he'll sit out everything after the first drive and a half or something like that. So it feels like this is an area where we're going to learn a lot about a lot of those young receivers, because you had that 2022 class that came in and the leading receiver had 1 catch. And so you're going to get a chance to see a lot more of those guys. You're going to get a chance to see probably a lot more Jaden Ballard this spring. And you're going to get to see some of the new guys who came in, who are the 2023 guys who are in for the spring. So this is going to be an opportunity to find out, I think you right now with Xavier Johnson, with Marvin Harrison, with Julian Fleming, with Emeka Egbuka, you kind of know what they have with those guys. This is going to be a really interesting spring, because it feels like, okay, who's going to be 5 and 6 and 7? Like what is the order going to be there? Because there's a lot of talented young guys, and we really haven't gotten a chance to see them. We're going to get a chance to see a lot of them this spring, and maybe you start to sort out, okay, who's going to be 5 and 6 and maybe potentially get on the field, and who might be able to jump up and even move higher in that rotation if they have a particularly good spring and a particularly good fall camp.
When Ryan Day said that Julian Fleming and Emeka Egbuka were going to be out, that immediately led me to thinking, okay, it's going to be the spring of Jaden Ballard and the spring of Caleb Brown. And those are 2 guys I would expect. Jaden Ballard, we're probably going to be hearing constantly about things he's doing. Caleb Brown in that slot. Xavier Johnson will be in that slot as well, because Emeka obviously being out. So you're going to have guys in there that everybody moves up. And so those guys get more reps, more opportunities to make plays. So I expect to hear about those guys. I think it would behoove everybody for Ohio State to behoove the Buckeyes to hear more and more about the second year guys, Keon Grays, Kojo Antwi, Caleb Burton, and as I said, Caleb Brown. There's going to be opportunities with, like you said, the veterans out. And how many reps is Xavier Johnson really taking at this point either? We'll see. Now, tight ends, you were there with Keenan Bailey. I was not, so I don't know what was said there. Go ahead and give us the lowdown.
Yeah, he talked a lot about first of all, how fortunate he is to have a lot of those guys back. Having a Cade Stover back this year makes such a difference at the top of that tight end room. And then now you're working in the, Joe Royers and Sam Harts and all those other guys, G. Scotts. So you're kind of working in guys, but having that guy who has played a whole bunch of snaps and played pretty well last year, having him back is a big start to that room. He was asked about replacing Mitch Rossi. Do you have a guy on that Mitch Rossi for that Mitch Rossi kind of fullback / tight end role? And he said, he didn't say yes. And it was more of a, you have to adapt your offense to what you have personnel wise. So, there's been some talk that maybe Zach Herbstreit plays that role, but if he doesn't, then that maybe changes a little bit what they have to do in that tight end room. He also talked about the fact that his path to the tight ends coaching job has been kind of a circuitous one. He has worked over the years at various times with the quarterbacks and the wide receivers and the offensive line. And I asked him about, how much of what you're doing in terms of tight end coaching, how much of that is coaching and it's, all the, attitude and preparation and all kind of stuff. And how much of that is like really specific technique, and you got to learn some different technique kind of stuff to coach tight ends than you did coaching wide receivers or offensive line and that kind of stuff. And, it sounds like it's probably, I don't think he put a number on it, but just sort of the way he talked about it, it felt like it was about 60%, coaching is coaching and 40% is sort of the technique kind of stuff. But, one of the interesting things about coaching tight ends is having coached offensive line, you're getting a lot of that blocking technique and the blocking scheme and all that kind of stuff from having worked with the offensive line over the years. You're getting a lot of the receiving portion of your job with the tight ends with the wide receiver coaching experience he has over the years. So it feels like he kind of has all the tools, and now it's just a matter of sort of, taking those apart and reassembling them to become a tight ends coach.
Yeah, he's got a very packed room and going to be adding to it with Jelani Thurman as well. So definitely a number of guys to work with there. And as we've been saying, I expect to hear Joe Royer's name this spring as a guy who's having a good camp. Walking out there, saw G. Scott and Xavier Johnson coming off of the practice field, probably doing some jugs guns, catching some passes there. Obviously, the season did not finish the way G. Scott wanted, so there's going to be some continued motivation there. Not that he's one that has suffered motivation issues. I wouldn't be surprised to hear plenty of his name as well in spring. Offensive line, the first most interesting thing to me, Ryan Day talked about how they're going to be moving some guys around and doing some things, and I don't want to get into it. And I'm thinking, yeah, you probably don't want to mention that you're going to move Donovan Jackson to left tackle. I understand. You don't want to talk about it just yet, until you do it. And then later on during his session, he's like, well, we're going to keep Donovan Jackson and Matt Jones stay at guard. We're going to keep them both at guard. And I was like, well, wow, to me, that's pretty significant. That says that you feel better at tackle than maybe those on the outside think you should. I don't know if that means Josh Fryer is a left tackle or a right tackle. Asking Justin Fry about that, he's like, well, yeah, right brain people, left brain people, right-handed people, left-handed people. You just got to see. They'll try them at both spots. To me, this felt like it was a better sign that, or a sign that Zen Michalski is stepping up. But Ryan Day also said that they have moved Tegra Shabola to tackle as well. To me, he's more of a right than a left. But I take this as good news for the tackle position. I don't think things are solved. I just think maybe and Ryan Day said it, like, yeah, you're going to have to move some guys around to see what they can do, but they want guys to find homes, and they want guys to be comfortable in those homes. And you've got two guys in Donovan Jackson and Matt Jones that are comfortable, then maybe the process of elimination, then you just need to find three more instead of trying to figure out where everybody else is comfortable, even though we're going to go with the best five and that, but they're also very, they want some guys to find comfort. And if you've got two guys that are already comfortable, let's see if you can just find the other three.
Yeah, if you don't have to shuffle everyone and have everyone in a new position, that's obviously preferable. If you didn't have to kick Donovan Jackson out to left guard or left tackle and move Matt Jones to center and have five guys starting in different spots than they did last year, that's obviously preferable if you can avoid that. But Day's answer was kind of, maybe guarded optimism, some cautious optimism that, it just sort of the vibe that I got was they might have the pieces they need to field a good offensive line right now, but they genuinely don't 100% know for sure. Because, if Josh Fryer can play left tackle at the level they need, great, that solves one problem. And then putting someone at right tackle, that maybe makes it a little bit easier to find a right tackle because, left tackle is a tougher spot than right tackle. And, if Tager Chibola can be a right tackle and not a left tackle, okay, great, then you put Tager Chibola at right tackle, fantastic. Or if Zen Michalski really steps up and plays left tackle, well, then you can put Josh Fryer at right tackle. And we have seen Josh Fryer already play right tackle at a pretty decent level. So that would potentially solve that. They're bringing in Vic Cutler out of ULM. He sounds like he's going to at least get the chance to take the first snaps at center this spring with Jacob James out. If that doesn't work, well, then you're going to have to see, maybe you have to kick Matt Jones over to center from right guard and you put Enoch Vermahi in at a guard spot. This is all, it feels like they think they might have the pieces to make this all work. And, we didn't even get into George Fitzpatrick or those guys, some of the younger guys who could potentially fit into that role as well. But, they think they might have the pieces, but this time last year, I think we all kind of said, okay, odds are this is going to be the starting line, this guy, right across the deck, these five guys. And it never really wavered from that much. This year, it feels much more wide open. Like they're hopeful, they're optimistic, but they don't really know for sure. And it would not at all surprise me if they came out of spring and said, you know what, we're not 100% comfortable with this. And then you try and dip into the portal and you try and find that left tackle, that right tackle, whatever it is that you're missing, that center, if you don't feel like you've got a center coming out of the spring, whatever it is, you dip into the portal to try and find whatever that missing piece is. One thing, speaking of centers, it was interesting. There was sort of the question, I think Luke Whippler turning pro caught some of us off guard. It sounded like that maybe caught some of the Ohio State coaches a little bit off guard. Like maybe that had been a little bit of a conversation, but they weren't necessarily thinking he was leaning towards leaving. And that, when he left, that left kind of a pretty big hole in the middle of that line. Because if you've got Luke Whippler back, then potentially you have both guards and your center back, or you could have, you kick one of those guys out to tackle, but you still got three of your guys back. Losing Luke Whippler feels like that was maybe the one kind of surprising twist where they were sort of expecting to lose both tackles, but not necessarily expecting to lose Whippler.
Yeah, when you look at that 2020 recruiting class, you never expect to lose an offensive lineman after 3 years, but you can look at Paris Johnson and go, he's a pretty good candidate. That's a guy you recruit thinking, okay, we better get the most out of him after, in 3 years, because it probably won't happen for a fourth year, even though it's rare, but also he was a rare recruit. Luke Whippler, and no disrespect, he's just a guy. Like he's every major class, every major school has a guy like him, rated, in the top 2 or 3 of his position, but you don't expect to lose an offensive lineman after 3 years. And of course he did very, very well in his time as an Ohio State starter, very determined to become a starter following his freshman year in 2020. So, he's a guy who is ahead of his game and it continues to move forward, and you're not really going to hold him back. And Ohio State sounded like they were pretty bummed when he left, and they should be. One last thing from Fry that I thought was interesting. he said he just told his guys this like today or yesterday this week, talking about offensive line. He said, the first year as an offensive lineman, you learn how to be a college football player. The second year, you learn your position. The third year is when you play your position. Like, this is, you don't just, it's going to be tough for everybody. The freshmen, you're barely going to be keeping your head above water. That's what happened last year with the freshmen, and now those guys have a better understanding. I just thought it was, like, it's an interesting way to frame it. First, you're going to learn how to be just a regular player. Then you're going to learn your position, and then finally you get to play it. So that's where a lot of his guys are now moving into that second or third year, where they need those guys to step up, and this is going to be a big spring for all of them. Defensive line, talked with Larry Johnson for quite a bit. At defensive end, I thought it was interesting. He asked about Jack Sawyer, and it just really seems like he would love it if Jack Sawyer didn't have to do any of that Jack stuff. Like if he could just stay as a defensive end and rush the passer and not get involved in all of the other stuff. And that's not going to be completely off the table. I think you'll still see Jack Sawyer doing some of that stuff. It's just interesting where you see like a position coach trying not to go against the grain in terms of what he would prefer. But I think that and both Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles, like JT Tuimoloau, can do that stuff. It doesn't have to just be one guy. Jim Knowles said, just keep an eye on Mitchell Melton as well. Even though he's out, he's a guy that they really, really like at that spot. And if he can develop and blossom there, that keeps Jack Sawyer at defensive end more. And of course, Caden Curry's there, but I don't know how much they're going to be rotating there anyway. So even, the way it's eventually going to work out, if they can get Mitchell Melton back and maybe keep Jack Sawyer as a defensive end as much as possible, I think that might keep Larry Johnson happy, and it might keep Jack Sawyer happy. And not that either of these guys are going to not do what they're being asked to, and not that Jack Sawyer wants to just be a defensive end, but I think everybody wants to be able to just be comfortable. And maybe that would be a way that everybody gets more comfortable.
You get the sense that they would, I'm sure, like to have guys. I mean, we talk about this at the wide receiver positions. We talk about this at some of the safety positions and even the offensive line at times, where you're sort of cross-trained, where you can do something else if necessary. But if you can you can sort of be ready to do that if needed, but that's only a break glass in case of emergency kind of situation. And you can just focus mainly on your one position during games and on the field. That's probably advantageous for your preparation. And, you're sort of ready to step in if needed, but you hope you're not needed. Mitchell Melton is kind of a little bit of an X factor here, because going into the spring game last year, he was someone who you kept hearing good things about. You kept hearing that they were really excited about Mitchell Melton and liked what he was bringing. And then he blows out his knee in the spring game, and just one of those non-contact things. I remember sitting right next to you and seeing him go down, and it was like, oh no, you knew immediately what had happened. And, he was someone who had kind of been waiting his turn a little bit and seemed like he was finally on the cusp of taking that next step, and then blows out his knee and then misses the whole year and is going to miss the spring as well. So I don't know that you can rely on Mitchell Melton this fall necessarily, because you don't know what you're going to have. You don't. Is he going to come back 100% exactly what he was before? You certainly hope so, and maybe he does. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes that doesn't. Knees are a little more predictable, that they're generally okay to do that, but you're still, that's putting a lot of eggs in his basket. So finding someone else there is going to be, important to sort of help with fleshing that role out a little bit. You also asked Larry Johnson about the interior of the defensive line, which I thought was interesting, because we talked about, we did a show on the depth charts and sort of projecting the depth charts on the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning show a couple weeks ago, and you had been sort of playing around with like maybe sliding some guys from nose to 3-tech or vice versa, to sort of balance out those positions. What did Larry Johnson tell you about that?
Well, yeah, I asked, with Ty Hamilton stepping up the way he did, do you maybe move Mike Hall to 3-tech so that you can have those two guys separate from each other and starting together? And he was like, yeah, we'll look at all of these things. And he basically finished up by saying, well, Mike Hall is going to be starting somewhere. And so, that's all you need. That's all you need to worry about. Ty Hamilton won that job, but don't worry, Mike Hall is going to be starting somewhere. And so I tend to think at this point, I still think he's going to be 3-tech, and Ty Hamilton, if he's playing, does everything that the coaches say he does, and then plays well and is a strong guy on there. Like, to me, it makes sense to separate those two. If he's your best nose tackle, or if these two are your best defensive tackles, separate them. And now you would have a rotation at 3-tech with Mike Hall and Tyleek Williams. And if you saw Tyleek Williams posted on social media a couple of days ago some speed numbers where he was the fastest of the defensive linemen, and Mitchell Melton was also up there. And it sounds like these might be pretty recent, so that would be a great sign for Mitchell Melton. But we know Tyleek Williams has burst. To me, that's a pretty impressive 1-2 combo. Unless, of course, both of those guys are now ready to play 40 snaps a game and you put them side by side. I think that would be a devastating thing. Is Tyleek Williams at that point where you can rely on him for that? I would need to see it. Like, if they tear it up this spring, by all means, put those two guys next to each other and have them play at the same time. I think they would be devastating. I just don't know that's going to happen. That feels like wishery more than reality, and it feels like it should be reality, but we haven't seen it yet. And not to interrupt you, but we saw them come in pass packages towards the end of the season. But like, enough subbing, enough packaging. Like, be the guys.
Yeah, you saw them situationally. You didn't see them 40 snaps a game, 45 snaps a game, which is based on how the impact that those guys can have when they're out there. You want to see more of them. And it feels like there must be a reason that you haven't seen more of them. And we've heard, conditioning and discipline and all that kind of stuff, just, focus and whatever the reason is, you've got to see it. And I'm kind of with you where it makes sense. Like, yes, that would be the best possible outcome. I'm sure the coaches are also smart enough to know that would be the best possible outcome. And therefore, if they haven't done that yet, it feels like there's probably a reason for that. So whatever that reason is, you got to get that worked out sometime between now and the Indiana game and get it figured out. And then, because there's not a ton of depth in those interior spots. It's basically the three guys we've talked about and Hero Kanu are kind of the bulk of what they've got on the interior of that defensive line. So it's not an incredibly deep position, but those are also guys who, if you do get 40 snaps a game from those guys, that could be a really game-changing thing on the interior of that defensive line.
I thought it was interesting. Larry Johnson said Hero Kanu came in at about 330 and is down to about 310, 305 now. Like, that's, I didn't realize he had gotten that big, because he never really looked that big, but he's naturally big. Like, when you saw him at camp, I mean, I think he was maybe supposed to be at like 295 pounds at that point. I'm not sure, but a guy who is going to factor in as well. Just not sure exactly where. Linebackers, Tom. No Tommy Eichenberg. I'm not sure if this is a dual thumb surgery. Probably not. Like you said, I'm sure the middle linebacker every year can probably be cleaned up and miss a spring. It's like, this is just standard operating procedure. No middle linebackers during spring ball. They're all being fixed. So there's that situation. I would expect plenty of Cody Simon there. I am interested to see what happens. Where is CJ Hicks strictly a will? Is Steel Chambers strictly a will? Do they try to mix one of those guys in? Can Reed Carrico step in as a Mike? Gabe Power. So doesn't just have to be CJ Hicks in there, and there are some other guys, some young guys that need to step in. Reed Carrico is to the point now where he's very following along that Tommy Eichenberg path where you don't play at all for your first 2 years, and that doesn't mean you're not going to play, but it sure would help if somebody got out of the way for you and then you can play. But it'd be a big spring for them. Also, Tom, we got to talk to James Laurinaitis for almost 35 minutes. Obviously, he's very happy to be back at Ohio State as a graduate assistant. And an example of the right timing. And he was asked about why didn't it happen before. And he just said, even going to Notre Dame for a year and seeing all of the support people. Everybody has a very important job, and you can't just take one of those guys and say, "Here, James, you do this job." Like it's all too well run and too intricate in big time college football just to find a spot. So something has to be open, and there was now an opening with Coy McFarland going to Tulsa from Ohio State as the GA with Kevin Wilson, and so this one made a lot of sense. Ryan Day called him up, said, "Would you have interest?" And James Laurinaitis said, "Well, I have to ask my boss," which of course is his wife. So he asked his wife and his 2 daughters, and they were like, "Yeah, yes, please." Yes, definitely, you have our blessing. But one of the other things that he was worried about, or he was concerned about, he wanted to know, because he said he had a lot of responsibility at Notre Dame as a linebackers coach, and he didn't want that to be lessened at Ohio State. Like, he wants to be involved, and that's probably like the one thing a head coach wants to hear from a graduate assistant. Like, I want to be involved. Boom, you're hired. Like, I want as much work as possible. I want to be. And so you could just view him as the linebackers coach, basically from here on out. And I don't think we ever got to talk to Coy McFarland. Obviously, this is a much different circumstance. And I do wonder if that will continue. It wouldn't shock me if it does. But when he sat down, back in the WAC, and somebody asked him if he had flashbacks. He's like, I feel like I can hear Luke Fickell yelling at me right now.
Yeah, it was definitely a, you see those guys who are the former players who come back, and it's very different for them coming back than it is for some other new staff addition. Tim Walton coming back last year was different than Perry Aliano coming back. And they have kind of made a point to bring back some of those former guys. That was something that Day was asked about. You have a bunch of, I think he said 6 or 8 former players on staff. Yeah. So, but that includes, Brian Hartline, obviously, and James Laurinaitis now, but it also includes guys like CJ Barnett, who is, he's not one of the 10 assistant on-field coaches. He's like a staff guy, but he is, again, someone who has gone through the process as a player and is now there as a coach and can kind of help set guys up for success because they know themselves what it took to be successful when they were at Ohio State. And James Laurinaitis was talking, he is limited in what he can do right now, I think, in a little bit in terms of recruiting in his current role. But when he's talking to guys, it is not hard for him to sell Ohio State because it's, well, what sold you on Ohio State? Okay. How did Ohio State set you up for long-term success in your career, both as a football player and then after your football career ended? That is not a hard thing to sell. That is not, I have to go check my notes. That is, this is my lived experience. Let me tell you how it helped me and how it might therefore also help you. And so that feels like that is, a little bit of an intentional thing with Day where he's trying to hire guys who, have ties to the program. And you're not going to make the entire coaching staff out of former players, but you're going to try and do that as best as you can. And you're trying to, he also seems like he's sort of got a little bit of a pattern of bringing up the GAs to those 10 countable assistant coach positions when those spots come available, internal hires, internal promotions, building your staff from within. Because again, if you are going to be a cultural centric program, you got to build that culture from within, and you have guys who you move up, who understand that culture. And there are limitations to that. It's good to bring in outside voices as well, but that feels like those are a couple like really intentional choices that Ryan Day has made in terms of his staff construction right now, moving a Keenan Bailey up from a GA to a 10 on-field assistant coach position, and then bringing in a former guy like James Laurinaitis again to kind of continue building what Ryan Day wants the culture of this program to be.
James Laurinaitis and Brian Hartline's an incredible example to aspire to be, because he is ready for every opportunity and he makes the most of every opportunity. He maximizes it. So that's what James Laurinaitis has set out to do. Be ready. And then when that opportunity arises, make the most of it, maximize it, and then take the next step. And somebody asked him, what are your coaching goals? And he said, to be the best linebacker coach in America at my alma mater. That's all he wants right now. And so that's what he's focused on. asked Jim Knowles about him. He's like, it's interesting to have now a guy on your staff whose picture has been on your wall for the past year. Basically like one of those things. You see him every day, and now you finally get to meet him and talk to him and interact with him. So they're looking forward to doing that. And I think he's been there for maybe a couple of days. Knowles said, so I asked him, so what's it like? He's like, been here for 2 days. Things are going great. That sort of thing. The corners, we talked with Tim Walton. He can't talk about Davison Igbinosun yet. He's not official, so that's been off the table. Talking about Denzel Burke as the lone returning starter. Did not call him a starter. Just said he's the lone returning starter, and he made point nobody is a starter. This is just a fact. Denzel Burke is a returning starter. Jordan Hancock, everybody else, obviously, you're going to have a competition for everybody. I think we all expect Denzel Burke to be one of those two starters. I don't necessarily expect Davison Igbinosun to just come in and start. And it sounds like he's going to somehow be able to participate in spring practice with like a short semester spring thing, Tom.
Yeah, that was something that we recorded, that instant reaction show that dropped as soon as the news broke. And our assumption at that time was, well, it's going to be, it's basically the start of February. The semester started 3 weeks ago. So obviously he's not here yet. And Alex Gleitman, who has been Alex Gleitman of BuckeyeHuddle.com, one of our recruiting analysts, has been really, really all over this. This is a Jersey guy, so Alex has a ton of great connections there. He said after talking to folks who are kind of close to the situation, it sounds like he is going to be able to enroll in time for spring ball, which Ohio State, for those of us who went to Ohio State during the quarters era, this is all very different, but they have like sub-semesters, and it's like phase 1 of spring semester and phase 2 of spring semester, and you can like split your semester into half or something, and then there's Maymester, which happens in May. It's all very confusing. This I am very old man shakes fist at cloud at what Ohio State is academic calendar wise now, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so he can potentially, I guess, enroll for phase 2 of spring semester, and then that's on March 1st, I believe. So then you would be in time to actually take part in spring ball. So that sounds like that maybe that's the case. None of this is official. This is just sort of interpreting based on Alex's reporting. I don't know that there are that many specifics out there yet, but if he's in for spring, that really makes this a much more interesting, chase for that job, because you have Davison Igbinosun, you have Denzel Burke, you've got Jordan Hancock, you also got Jair Brown, and I think Jair Brown is kind of a sneaky fourth option there, because he was pretty impressive in the spots that he was thrown into, and that is not easy to do as a true freshman. Denzel Burke did that in 2021, and then you got a little bit of Jair Brown there in 2022. You got Ryan Turner in that mix as well. There are opportunities. There are clear pathways to the field for just about any of those guys if they have a big spring and a good summer. So if Davison Igbinosun is in for that spring ball, that certainly puts him firmly in the mix for a starting job, but I would definitely not say a guaranteed starting job. I don't think that you're anywhere close to that level with him.
Jair Brown might have the longest odds of the three, but I might like those odds the best if I were making a wager, because again, he was impressive in the limited opportunities that he got. I grabbed clips from 3 games that Ole Miss played last year, and I grabbed all of the relevant Davison Igbinosun clips, and I wrote up just some thoughts on him, put those videos out on Twitter. And it's a funny thing when you put out some videos of players who aren't perfect, when they make some mistakes, the reaction is that, boy, this guy is awful. This guy, what is he doing? Football should not be his first sport. This guy should be doing something else. He should be working a checkout line, something of that nature. And not even like an actual checkout line, just staying back for the self checkout lane and like checking IDs. That's all this guy is good for. That's kind of the reaction from a couple of people. And it's like, he's a freshman cornerback playing in the SEC, playing in major college football. It's not always going to look fantastic. But you get a guy with 10 starts under his belt to now come into your program, and Tom, watching some of this Ole Miss defense, they do some weird stuff, man. Like they will have corners like 11 yards off the line. They're, it's very foreign to what we've seen at Ohio State. See if he can blossom. But what's interesting, because I think half of the people who are like freshman All-American, he's an instant starter, get Denzel Burke out of there. Then they watch some of the video and see like, he got called for pass interference. This guy is never going to play. And you know what? Turns out it's everything's in the middle. The extremes are not for the players. The extremes are for the people who, react wildly on social media. I think Davis and Igbinosun will be somewhere between pretty good and quite good.
You're never going to get a Fox Sports afternoon talk show with that attitude, mister. That is not how this is done at all. Is he a bum or is he a future Hall of Famer? Make up your mind, please. Goodness, we have a show to run. Come on. It's funny. I had to, like, your brain, I know exactly what you're talking about because I started watching the video you put on Twitter and I was like, oh, that's weird. He missed a tackle. And it's like, oh, right, this isn't like his Huddle highlights. Yeah. This is not just all the good plays. This is not Cam Martinez, 10 minutes of touchdowns. It's like, oh, every once in a while as a quarterback, you throw an incomplete pass. Really? Since when? I watch all my football through Huddle films. Is that not accurate? I thought that's how football worked. No? Yeah, he is another player who has an opportunity to earn a starting spot with Ohio State. This is not Justin Fields coming in and, this is very clearly the most talented player at the position. This is a player who is talented, has an opportunity to earn a spot, provides incredibly valuable depth and competition at that position, and we'll see how the spring goes, and we'll see how the summer goes, and maybe he earns a starting spot. That's entirely possible. There are a lot of other talented guys in that room. Having one more talented guy in that room is a good thing. That is not, this is not something that is a problem if he comes in and is the third corner or is the first corner off the bench. If he comes in as the first corner off the bench, that is not a wasted scholarship. That is not a bad roster move. If he is the first guy off the bench, it is not a bad roster move if he's the second guy off the bench. Because if he's the second guy off the bench, guess what? That means that if he wasn't there, you'd have the guy who's the third guy off the bench being the second guy off the bench. That's actually a good thing to have a little bit more quality depth at that spot. And if he earns a starting spot, great. But I don't think any of those decisions have been made yet by the people who matter. So don't feel like you should make those decisions and final judgments based on 2 minutes and 18 seconds of Tony's video work on Twitter.
I don't know. I was pretty proud of it. I got some circles on there. I got some nice transitions from highlight to highlight. Although to call them highlights,
star wipe.
Again, and somebody responded like, "Are these lowlights?" Like, no, they're just clips. It's just every clip. It's not highlights. It is a jarring thing where like oh, okay, this is reality. Safeties. They're not sure that Jihad Carter is necessarily the nickel. Jim Knowles like, now he can play there, but he can also play in the back. And he's done all of this stuff. And Jim Knowles also said that he wants to see more of Cam Martinez and what he can do because they haven't really gotten a good chance to see that. And I know when I posted that on the message board, people are like, he didn't, he hasn't seen enough. So that's again the extremes. Obviously you're not just going to write somebody off. You've got all spring to work on getting more information and getting him more reps, Cam Martinez, and also Jihad Carter. I do still expect Jihad Carter to be that guy, at least competing there, because you've got the options in the back end with Lathan Ransom, who Noel said he could play either. And that, obviously it's too early to say one way or the other. And he's talking about all of these guys, high on Cam, high on Josh Proctor, and basically like Sonny's going to play somewhere. That was another thing that Jim Knowles said, like Sonny's going to play. So where that is, he said like 25% of spring is like experimenting. And I asked him, so how much of that 25% is like based on Sonny? He's like, well, he's an interesting athlete, and to find places for him to do stuff. That's what we've talked about, Tom. You don't have to just keep him a safety, and that's not what they did at CFP. They had him down in the box. So finding the different things that he can do while also allowing him to find a home, I think and that was one of the things about Davis and Igbinosun, playing all of these different coverages as a true freshman. It's hard to get good at certain things when you're playing as much deep zone as you are press, as you are completely off. Like having Sonny Styles be able to do all of these things is great, but kind of like the offensive line as well, you still want them to find a home. I think this spring is about finding homes for just about everybody at safety.
Well, with Sonny Styles in particular, he's such a talented player that you want him, you need him on the field somewhere, because that's talent that you just does not come around every day. There is a reason he was a 5-star. There is a reason he was able to play in the college football playoff at a time when he should have been still a student in high school. That is not normal. And we've heard them talk about him as a secret weapon and just an athletic freak. And that's the kind of guy you find a spot for on the field. And if that spot is 4 different spots, that's fine. It's better if you kind of have one consistent spot you're mainly focused at, and then you can sort of move around and adjust a little bit as the circumstances dictate. But yeah, he's someone who, of all the guys in that defense, I think, or in that safety room, I think he's the guy that I would be most confident averages at least 35, 40 snaps this fall. And Lathan Ransom's probably in that conversation as well. But you're going to find a spot for him somewhere. And, maybe sometimes that's more linebackery. Maybe sometimes that's, he could slot in just about anywhere back there and kind of go, yeah, okay, I can talk myself into that. So yeah, we'll see. It's, you've got Josh Proctor back, and I feel like Josh Proctor, you could kind of take all the stuff I just said about Igmanosin and apply it to Josh Proctor, where, yeah, he could be a starter. Yeah, he could be the number 2 guy somewhere. Whatever it is, he's going to make them better back there, either as a starter or as a depth guy. Lathan Ransom, we'll see where he slots in. Cam Martinez, Jahad Carter, we'll see where those guys slot in. But, that is a room where they were maybe a little short of talent. And now, bringing in Jahad Carter is a big deal. Getting back Josh Proctor is a big deal, because now you have, instead of 3 guys and then you're leaning on a Kai Stokes or someone like that to make a big role in his second year on campus, you got a little more depth back there, and you can work those guys in a little more situationally and just find the right spots for them.
And lastly, special teams. Neither you or I really spent any time with Parker Fleming. We were walking around with other guys. What is there to say about the special teams? They're outstanding all year long. No concerns there. Certainly no mistakes at the end that I can think of.
He said, getting everyone in trouble. It's a weird situation there where you've got a new long snapper. You got Jesse Mirko back, so Jesse Mirko, you kind of know what you got. I think Parker Fleming's probably going to be the front runner for that. I'm sorry, Parker Lewis is going to be the front runner for that place kicking field goal kind of role there. But at the end, I walked up right at the end, and Parker Fleming was asked, like, how many kickers do you guys have on scholarship right now? And it's kind of like, well, that's a complicated question. It was like, how is that a complicated question? But with Ohio State, it is kind of a complicated question. So there's going to be a little bit of a moving target there. But I think, I would be very surprised if Parker Lewis was not the kicker, Jesse Mirko not the punter, and then the long snapper from Arizona State. Those feel like more or less sure things. And then, he was talking about the fact that the loss of Jackson Smith and Jigba in the punt return game last year really kind of threw them off. That changed sort of what they were trying to do in the punt return game last year. And so, yeah, there's never a shortage of skill talent at Ohio State. So I'm sure they'll have someone back to throw back there at those different spots. It'll be very interesting to see. That's somewhere where we have seen, the exciting, electric, true freshman who you just want to see with the ball in his hands in the open field. It'll be interesting to see which of those guys potentially slots into that role or the kick return role this year.
It feels to me like saying the loss of Jackson Smith and Jigba affected them at punt return. It affected them in finding a guy to fair catch, basically because they had some issues with that. Like, do we really think Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be running around returning kicks, returning punts? I swear it's just the only job for the punt returner is to fair catch it, and then that's it. And do you think that that interrupted what you were going to do there or impacted it? I mean, it's impacted what 3 returns that you're going to have for 22 yards. I mean, but I'll leave it at that, Tom. I'll leave it alone. It's time to go. Anything else before we do call it a day?
I think that was the big stuff, and if not, I'm sure I will remember something else as soon as we're done. And if so, I will talk about it with Kevin Noon on the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning episode that will run on this week.
Fantastic! I look forward to watching that and listening to that. I do it both. I should just start doing it at the same time.
Sync the audio and the video. Yeah,
I would become twice as productive. Yeah, I don't know. It's dangerous. Anyway, that will do it for this episode. I want to thank you all for joining us. As always, you can find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Come remember, say hello to us there on the message board. Also find us at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle as well. Go ahead and like this video if you like it. Go ahead and hit that thumbs up. Remember to subscribe on YouTube to us as well. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys later.